A single candle burns beside a narrow window in the Tower of the Hand. Outside, King's Landing is quieter than it ever seems during daylight. The cries of merchants have faded into memory, the clang of the smithies has settled into silence, and only the distant murmur of Blackwater Bay rises with the evening wind. Wax slowly gathers beneath the candle, one pale drop after another, while shadows stretch across maps, letters, and carved wooden figures standing upon a game board that no child would ever recognize as a toy. Somewhere beyond those walls, thousands of people sleep without knowing that the fate of kingdoms is already being decided by conversations they will never hear. This evening, you and I are following one of the most misunderstood minds in all of Westeros as we explore why Cersei Lannister was the smartest player in the Game of Thrones. Settle in. Let the story move at an unhurried pace and allow the weight of old castles, forgotten prophecies, and quiet ambitions to carry you gently toward sleep. If you've been traveling these nights with me before, leave a note of which night you've reached. If this is your first, simply call it Night 1. Our story begins not with a queen wearing a crown, but with a little girl who believed that the future had already been written for her. Why would the most dangerous queen in Westeros spend the rest of her life haunted not by armies or dragons, but by words whispered in a tent beside the sea? To answer that question, we must travel back to the western coast of the Seven Kingdoms, to the immense golden fortress of Casterly Rock. Long before Robert Baratheon claimed the Iron Throne in 283 AC, before the banners of House Stark rode south, before the War of the Five Kings stained half the realm with blood, there lived a daughter of House Lannister, whose greatest inheritance was not wealth. It was expectation. The rock itself rose above the sunset sea like a mountain carved by giants, its halls filled with polished stone, rich tapestries, and enough gold to make every lord in Westeros glance west whenever debts came due. Here, beneath the stern eye of Lord Tywin Lannister, Cersei first learned that affection was fleeting, but power endured. Cersei Lannister entered the world in 266 AC alongside her twin brother, Jaime Lannister. Twins already carried an air of wonder in the eyes of many Westerosi. Yet among the Lannisters, they were celebrated as proof that fortune continued to smile upon one of the oldest and richest houses in the realm. Their mother, Joanna Lannister, was remembered across the Seven Kingdoms for her grace and intelligence, while Tywin had already begun restoring House Lannister's authority. After the weakness of his own father, Lord Titus Lannister, from the beginning, the twins shared an unusually close bond, sleeping in neighboring chambers, playing together through the endless galleries beneath the rock, and growing accustomed to finishing each other's thoughts. Even as children, servants quietly remarked that separating Jaime from Cersei felt like trying to divide a single reflection into two different mirrors. The castle itself shaped them almost as much as their parents did. Casterly Rock was not merely a fortress, but an entire world hollowed into living stone, overlooking Lannisport and the restless waters beyond. Gold mines wound beneath its foundations. Generations of kings had ruled there before Aegon's conquest, and banners bearing the Crimson Lion flew proudly from its towers. Every corridor reminded young Cersei that she belonged to a family unlike any other. She heard tales of Lan the Clever, the legendary trickster said to have won the rock through wit rather than force, and those old stories quietly planted an idea that strength alone never ruled the world. Cleverness often reached places that swords never could. Then, in 273 AC, everything changed inside the walls of Casterly Rock. Joanna Lannister died giving birth to Tyrion, and grief settled over the family with a permanence that never truly lifted. Lord Tywin never remarried despite being only in his late 30s, an extraordinary decision for one of the greatest lords in Westeros, where dynastic marriages shaped the fate of kingdoms. Instead, he buried himself deeper in duty, discipline, and legacy. Tyrion grew beneath the shadow of blame that he never deserved, while Cersei watched the strongest man she knew become colder with every passing year. It is easy to think of Tywin only as the ruthless lord seen during the War of the Five Kings. Yet the loss of Joanna explains much of the silence that filled those halls thereafter. The rock remained magnificent, but warmth became increasingly difficult to find. Why does that loss matter so much when discussing Cersei's political genius decades later? Because children often learn their deepest lessons before they understand they are being taught. After Joanna's death, praise became scarce within House Lannister. Success earned approval, failure invited disappointment, and weakness found little mercy. Tywin rarely needed to raise his voice because his expectations alone carried enormous weight. Cersei absorbed that lesson completely. Love could vanish without warning, parents could disappear, and even the richest house in Westeros could not bargain with death. But influence, reputation, and fear endured far longer than affection ever seemed to. Among the few companions close to Cersei during her youth was Melara Heatherspoon, the daughter of a wealthy noble family sworn to House Lannister. Together they shared the dangerous curiosity common to children raised among adults who constantly whispered about secrets they were not meant to hear. Their questions eventually led them beyond the safety of familiar roads to visit an old fortune teller known throughout the region as Maggie the Frog. Despite the mocking name, Maggie's reputation stretched beyond simple superstition. She lived near Lannisport, spoke with unsettling certainty, and accepted blood instead of coin from those who wished to glimpse the future. In Westeros, prophecy is never ordinary. From the dreams of Daenerys the Dreamer before the doom of Valyria to the dragon dreams experienced by House Targaryen, the world has repeatedly shown that strange visions deserve attention, even when their meanings remain hidden. The meeting itself remains one of the defining moments in Cersei's life. According to her own memories in A Feast for Crows, Maggie asked whether the girl wished to know her future, and Cersei answered with the confidence expected of Tywin's daughter. The prophecy that followed was precise rather than vague. Cersei would become queen, but not forever. Another queen, younger and more beautiful, would cast her down and take everything she held dear. She would bear 3 children while the king would father 16. Gold would crown her children, and gold would shroud them. Finally came the most terrifying line of all, foretelling that the Valonqar, a younger brother, would wrap his hands around her pale throat and choke the life from her. Those words never truly left her. Whether the prophecy described an unavoidable future or became powerful simply because Cersei believed it is one of Martin's most fascinating mysteries. The novels never give a simple answer. Instead, they show a queen interpreting nearly every threat through Maggie's prediction. Every younger woman at court becomes a possible rival. Every younger brother carries hidden danger. Her fear of Tyrion grows into obsession, even though many readers have long argued that the prophecy could point elsewhere. Jaime is technically the younger twin by birth, while others have suggested entirely different interpretations of the Valonqar. Martin deliberately leaves the door open, allowing prophecy to function less as certainty than as a force shaping human choices. That uncertainty reveals something remarkable about Cersei's mind. Many characters in A Song of Ice and Fire receive warnings about the future, yet few allow them to dominate every important decision. Cersei does. She remembers Maggie's words years later with astonishing clarity, repeating individual phrases exactly as they were spoken. The prophecy becomes not merely a prediction, but a lens through which she views the world. Every alliance, every suspicion, every rivalry is quietly measured against those childhood memories beside the old woman's tent. Even victories bring little peace because prophecy offers no comfort. It simply waits. Why does this not add up? If Cersei believed so completely in Maggie's vision, why spend decades fighting against it instead of accepting what she considered inevitable? That contradiction lies at the heart of her character. She never surrenders to fate. Instead, she wages war against destiny itself, convinced that intelligence, caution, and relentless determination can outwit whatever the gods or whatever darker forces exist beyond human understanding have planned. Ironically, that determination often pushes her toward the very outcomes she fears most. In George R.R. Martin's world, prophecy rarely acts as an iron chain. More often, it resembles a road that people unknowingly build beneath their own feet. The candle beside the window has burned a little lower now. Outside, the wind carries the scent of salt from Blackwater Bay, though the girl at Casterly Rock has not yet seen King's Landing, the Iron Throne, or the crown that will someday rest upon her head. She knows only the echo of Maggie's quiet voice and the silence waiting for her in the halls after her mother's death. Before she ever learned how to command guards, manipulate councils, or challenge kings, Cersei Lannister learned something far more dangerous. She became convinced that the game had already begun long before anyone else realized they were playing. Why did King Aerys II reject a marriage that seemed almost perfect on paper, and in doing so, alter the course of Westerosi history? By the time Cersei Lannister reached her early teenage years, Lord Tywin Lannister had become the most powerful nobleman in the Seven Kingdoms after the royal family itself. He had served as Hand of the King since 262 AC, restoring the royal treasury, enforcing order throughout the realm, and strengthening the authority of the Iron Throne after years of decline under King Jaehaerys II. The wealth of Casterly Rock flowed steadily into the crown's coffers, and many lords quietly observed that Tywin governed more effectively than the increasingly unstable King Aerys ever did. If politics alone determined royal marriages, Cersei would almost certainly have become the wife of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Instead, pride, jealousy, and suspicion intervened before the match could ever become reality. The relationship between Aerys II and Tywin had not always been poisoned. As young men, they had been companions, sharing ambitions for a prosperous reign after the brief rule of Jaehaerys II. When Aerys ascended the Iron Throne in 262 AC, appointing Tywin as Hand seemed the natural decision. For nearly 2 decades, the arrangement succeeded despite growing tensions. Taxes were collected efficiently, rebellious bannermen were restrained, and the authority of the crown appeared stronger than it had been in years.
Yet every successful reform carried Tywin's signature more clearly than Aerys's, and the king gradually came to resent hearing courtiers praise his hand rather than their sovereign. In King's Landing, admiration can become a dangerous currency when directed toward the wrong man. The breach widened after the defiance of Duskendale in 277 AC. Lord Dennis Darklyn of Duskendale imprisoned King Aerys during a disastrous negotiation, holding him captive for roughly half a year, before Sir Barristan Selmy rescued him in one of the greatest feats ever credited to the Kingsguard. The experience transformed Aerys completely. He emerged deeply paranoid, distrustful of nearly every great lord, reluctant to leave the Red Keep, and increasingly convinced that betrayal surrounded him. His nails grew long, his beard became wild, and he surrounded himself with fear instead of counsel. Tywin remained Hand, but the partnership that had once governed the realm had quietly ended. From that point forward, Aerys increasingly measured every suggestion against imagined conspiracies. It was during these years that Tywin proposed what he considered an obvious alliance. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, born in 259 AC at Summerhall on the very day that fire consumed King Aegon V and much of the royal family, had grown into a thoughtful, scholarly young prince, admired across the realm. Cersei herself had developed an idealized vision of Rhaegar, imagining that one day she would sit beside him as queen. According to the world of ice and fire, Tywin sought to marry his daughter to the heir to the Iron Throne, uniting the greatest noble house with the royal dynasty. Politically, the proposal was difficult to improve upon. The Lannisters possessed immense wealth, the Targaryens possessed legitimacy, and together they could have bound the Western and royal interests for another generation. Aerys refused. His rejection was not merely practical, but deeply personal. At court, he publicly declared that serving girls were suitable companions for the sons of lesser lords, but the blood of the dragon demanded something higher for Prince Rhaegar. The insult reached far beyond Cersei herself. It struck directly at Tywin's honor before the assembled nobility, suggesting that even the richest house in Westeros remained beneath the royal family despite everything Tywin had accomplished. Such humiliations accumulated over the years. They did not erupt into immediate rebellion, but they settled like stones beneath calm water, waiting for the right moment to disturb the surface. Looking backward with the benefit of history, that single refusal appears astonishing. Had Rhaegar married Cersei, instead of eventually wedding Elia Martell of House Martell, the political balance of the Seven Kingdoms would have shifted dramatically. Dorne would have stood outside the royal marriage alliance, while the Westerlands would have become inseparable from the Iron Throne. Of course, this remains speculation. Canon tells us only what happened, not what might have been. Yet Martin repeatedly demonstrates how seemingly personal decisions reshape entire kingdoms, and this rejected marriage proposal stands among the clearest examples. Why then did Cersei never release that dream? Even after her marriage to Robert Baratheon, memories of Rhaegar continued to surface in her thoughts. In A Feast for Crows, she recalls believing that Rhaegar would have understood her in ways Robert never could. Whether that belief reflected reality is impossible to know. The prince was known for melancholy, discipline, and a profound sense of duty, while Cersei hungered for recognition and influence. Their marriage, had it occurred, might have flourished or collapsed under entirely different pressures. The important truth is not whether Cersei judged Rhaegar accurately, but that she continued measuring every king against the one she never married. Then came Robert's rebellion, beginning in 282 AC after Prince Rhaegar carried off Lyanna Stark from Harrenhal, an event whose true nature remains one of the saga's great revelations. Lord Rickard Stark and Brandon Stark were executed in King's Landing. Jon Arryn raised the banners of the Vale rather than surrender Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon. The battles of Summerhall, Ashford, Bells, and finally the Trident followed, where Robert slew Rhaegar beneath the ruby-studded armor that scattered gemstones into the river. When King's Landing ultimately fell in 283 AC, Lord Tywin entered the city under banners of loyalty before ordering the sack that ended Targaryen rule. House Lannister had chosen its side only after the outcome had become increasingly clear, preserving both its strength and its influence. The marriage that followed united Cersei and Robert, but only in law. Politically, it solved an immediate problem. Robert Baratheon needed the wealth of House Lannister to stabilize his new reign after years of costly war, while Tywin ensured that his daughter still became queen despite the fall of House Targaryen. From the outside, the arrangement appeared triumphant. The daughter once denied Prince Rhaegar now wore the crown of the Seven Kingdoms. Songs could easily mistake that ending for victory. The reality inside the Red Keep proved very different. Robert entered the marriage carrying ghosts of his own. His love for Lyanna Stark never faded, despite her death at the Tower of Joy near the war's end. In Cersei's own recollections, their relationship suffered damage almost immediately. One night, Robert called her Lyanna in his sleep, a moment she remembered with extraordinary bitterness. Many years later, whether every detail of that memory is perfectly reliable matters less than what it reveals about her. She concluded that affection would never secure her place beside the king. If she wished to survive in the dangerous world of King's Landing, she would need another source of strength. Another decision made years before now revealed its unexpected consequences. Jaime Lannister had entered the Kingsguard in 281 AC after Aerys unexpectedly appointed him at only 15 years of age. Officially, it honored one of the realm's finest young knights. Unofficially, many readers and several characters within the story recognize the appointment as another calculated insult aimed at Tywin. Members of the Kingsguard renounce inheritance and lands, meaning Jaime could no longer succeed his father as Lord of Casterly Rock. Tywin resigned his hand soon afterward and returned west in anger. Yet the unintended result was remarkable. Jaime remained permanently in King's Landing beside Cersei, separated from the Rock, but never from his twin. What Aerys intended as punishment
ultimately placed one of House Lannister's greatest assets exactly where Cersei would need him most. By the time the first years of Robert's reign settled into uneasy peace, the young queen had learned a lesson that many experienced lords still failed to grasp. Crowns did not guarantee happiness, wealth did not guarantee respect, marriage did not guarantee loyalty. The glittering halls of the Red Keep looked magnificent beneath torchlight, but beneath polished marble and painted ceilings, every smile concealed calculation. As the candle beside the window burns steadily through the night, Cersei is beginning to understand that ruling the Seven Kingdoms has very little to do with wearing a crown, and almost everything to do with seeing the moves that others never notice until it is too late. Why did so many of the greatest political minds in Westeros underestimate Cersei Lannister for nearly 2 decades? By the opening chapters of A Game of Thrones, men such as Jon Arryn, Stannis Baratheon, Peter Baelish, Varys, Renly Baratheon, Grand Maester Pycelle, and even Eddard Stark all possess pieces of the political puzzle surrounding the Iron Throne. Yet, remarkably few of them seem to believe that Cersei herself is directing much of the game. They speak of Robert's drinking, Tywin's ambitions, Jaime's reputation, Littlefinger's schemes, or Varys's whisperers. Again and again, Cersei is treated as an extension of House Lannister, rather than as an independent strategist. That assumption becomes one of the greatest miscalculations in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. The structure of Robert Baratheon's government helped create this illusion. After claiming the throne in 283 AC, Robert showed little interest in the daily burdens of ruling. Hunting, feasting, tournaments, and memories of war held his attention far more easily than taxation, diplomacy, or law. Jon Arryn served faithfully as Hand of the King for roughly 15 years, carrying much of the practical responsibility for governing the realm. Stannis Baratheon administered Dragonstone with relentless discipline, while Renly Baratheon charmed allies through wit and easy confidence. Meetings of the small council often revolved around Jon Arryn, Varys, Littlefinger, Pycelle, and Barristan Selmy, leaving Robert himself impatient whenever discussions became too detailed. To an outside observer, it appeared that the kingdom functioned despite its king, rather than because of him. Cersei understood something that Robert never bothered to notice. Kings issue commands, but castles are held together by countless ordinary people whose names rarely appear in chronicles. Servants carried messages through hidden passages. Guards determined who entered private chambers. Stewards managed provisions. Wet nurses, chambermaids, stable boys, cooks, and cupbearers all witnessed conversations that powerful lords assumed remained secret. Unlike Varys, Cersei never built an organized network comparable to his little birds. Instead, she learned to recognize which individuals mattered on any given day. Influence often grows most effectively when it appears informal. A quiet favor remembered by a household knight can prove more valuable than a public decree signed beneath the royal seal. Her greatest secret, however, remained astonishingly fragile. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen Baratheon were presented to the realm as Robert's legitimate children, heirs of House Baratheon through their father and House Lannister through their mother. In truth, As the novels establish beyond question, all three were fathered by Jaime Lannister. The deception endured year after year, despite taking place inside the most closely watched castle in Westeros. Robert never recognized the truth. Thousands of courtiers walked the halls of the Red Keep. The royal children grew into adolescence beneath countless observant eyes. Yet the secret survived because people usually accept what power tells them is normal. The evidence itself seems almost obvious once it is gathered together. Robert Baratheon possessed the distinctive black hair inherited from House Baratheon, a trait so consistently dominant that it became central to Jon Arryn's final investigation. Across generations recorded in the lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms, marriages between Baratheons and families with fair or silver hair repeatedly produced dark-haired children. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen instead inherited the unmistakable golden hair and green eyes associated with House Lannister. Jon Arryn's final words, "The seed is strong," were not poetry, but the conclusion of careful research. He had compared bloodlines, examined family histories, and reached a truth that endangered the stability of the entire realm. Why then did Jon Arryn not act immediately? That question remains one of the quiet mysteries surrounding the opening of the saga. The novels indicate that he and Stannis Baratheon investigated together before Jon's sudden death. Stannis, ever cautious, withdrew to Dragonstone after concluding the danger surrounded the inquiry. Jon Arryn may have hoped to gather irrefutable proof before accusing the Queen of incest and treason, understanding that a failed accusation would plunge the Seven Kingdoms into civil war. Instead, he died unexpectedly after being poisoned by tears of lice through the conspiracy orchestrated by Peter Baelish and Lysa Arryn. Littlefinger later boasts of his role, revealing that the murder served his own ambitions rather than Cersei's. Yet the Queen benefited enormously from a crime she did not arrange. This distinction matters because it illustrates one of Cersei's greatest political strengths. She did not need to control every event personally. She understood how to recognize opportunities created by the ambitions of others. Littlefinger pursued chaos because chaos elevated him. Varys manipulated factions to prepare the realm for the eventual restoration of House Targaryen, or at least the restoration of the young prince he presents as Aegon Targaryen in the novels. Cersei pursued the security of her children and the dominance of House Lannister. Their goals differed sharply, but at certain moments, those independent ambitions produced outcomes that happened to strengthen her position. Politics in Westeros often resembles several games being played upon the same board, each player believing that everyone else shares identical objectives. Another subtle advantage came from expectation itself. Many powerful men at court carried deeply rooted assumptions about women and authority. Lords commanded castles, marshaled armies, inherited lands, and sat upon councils. Noble women certainly exercised influence, but often through marriages, family alliances, or household management rather than direct governance. Cersei recognized these assumptions and quietly exploited them. When rivals dismissed her as merely Robert's wife, they lowered their guard. When they attributed every calculated move to Tywin, they overlooked the Queen standing only a few steps away. Ironically, prejudice itself became one of her strongest political defenses. Even Tywin underestimated certain aspects of his daughter. In his conversations with Tyrion during A Storm of Swords, he speaks dismissively of Cersei's judgment while simultaneously relying upon her marriage to secure Lannister influence over the Iron Throne. Tywin understood administration better than nearly anyone alive. He understood war, finance, intimidation, and dynastic politics with extraordinary clarity. Yet he often viewed Cersei primarily as a daughter whose greatest political value lay in the alliances she could forge through marriage. Cersei never accepted that limitation. She wanted not merely to influence kings, but to replace them as the true center of authority. Her twin brother remained the one constant element in every calculation. Jaime served within the Kingsguard, living inside the Red Keep despite having renounced inheritance. The two shared an intimacy that shaped countless decisions, though the precise extent of their political cooperation varied over the years. Jaime excelled with sword and lance, winning renown across the Seven Kingdoms, despite the stain of the name Kingslayer. Cersei excelled at reading loyalties inside enclosed spaces, understanding who feared whom, who coveted advancement, and who could be persuaded with promises rather than threats. Together they formed an unusual partnership, though each increasingly misunderstood the other as the years passed. Meanwhile, another observer watched almost everything without fully revealing his own intentions. Lord Varys, master of whisperers, possessed information unmatched anywhere in Westeros. His network stretched from Flea Bottom to Pentos, from the kitchens beneath the Red Keep to merchant ships crossing the narrow sea. He knew of hidden passages built during the reign of Maegor the First Targaryen, recruited children ignored by society, and gathered secrets with remarkable patience. Yet even Varys rarely confronted Cersei directly during Robert's reign. His larger designs reached far beyond the immediate politics of King's Landing. In retrospect, it is striking that two of the realm's finest manipulators spent years studying one another while pursuing entirely different endgames. As another hour slips quietly into the night, the candle beside the window burns lower still. Across the Red Keep, armored guards pace familiar corridors, servants carry fresh wine to noble chambers, and courtiers whisper beneath painted ceilings, believing they understand where true power resides. Few of them notice the Queen listening more carefully than anyone realizes. Fewer still recognize that the woman they dismiss as merely Tywin's daughter has already begun mastering the most valuable lesson in the Game of Thrones. The strongest move is often the one your opponents never think to attribute to you. Why did Robert Baratheon have to die before anyone could openly challenge Cersei? And was his death truly a stroke of chance? When readers first encounter the king in A Game of Thrones, Robert appears almost indestructible despite his expanding waistline and growing indifference toward ruling. He still carries the reputation of the young warrior who shattered Prince Rhaegar's breastplate with a warhammer at the Battle of the Trident in 283 AC. Lords continue to remember the giant of the rebellion rather than the exhausted monarch who now spends more time drinking than governing. Yet beneath the surface, Robert's greatest weakness is no longer wine or hunting. It is predictability. Cersei comes to understand that a man does not have to be murdered directly if he can be trusted to destroy himself. The opening chapters of the novel quietly establish the rhythm of Robert's life with remarkable consistency. He loves boar hunts, grand feasts, melee tournaments, and excessive drinking. He dislikes council meetings, financial reports, and complicated political disputes. The royal treasury sinks deeper into debt, owing immense sums to House Lannister, the Iron Bank of Braavos, and other lenders, while Robert dismisses such concerns with a wave of his hand.
Littlefinger manages accounts in increasingly creative ways. Jon Arryn spends years attempting to keep the government functional, and the king simply assumes tomorrow will resemble yesterday. That confidence comforts his friends. To an observant enemy, it becomes a map. Cersei does not defeat Robert because she is physically stronger, politically more legitimate, or militarily superior. She defeats him because she studies his habits instead of his titles. This distinction separates her from many of the ambitious figures surrounding the Iron Throne. Others focus upon armies, castles, inheritance, or alliances. Cersei watches the man himself. She learns when he grows careless, whom he trusts without question, how deeply he drinks during hunts, and how completely he dismisses danger once the chase begins. Hunting in the Kingswood was never unusual for Robert. That normality is exactly what made it useful. The instrument she ultimately employs is neither assassin nor poison. It is Sir Lancel Lannister, her young cousin, son of Sir Kevan Lannister. By the time Robert prepares for his final hunt in 298 AC, Lancel has become one of the king's squires. His duties include serving wine, assisting with armor, and remaining close during royal excursions. In a feast for crows, after joining the faith, Lancel finally confesses his role to Jaime. He admits that Cersei instructed him to keep the king supplied with exceptionally strong wine throughout the hunt. The confession is direct, removing any doubt that Robert's intoxication formed part of her design. Notice what this plan does not require. It does not require certainty that Robert will die. It does not depend upon hidden blades, hired killers, or impossible precision. Robert has hunted dangerous animals for decades. A sober king survives more often than not. A heavily intoxicated king facing an enormous boar dramatically increases the odds of disaster. The beauty and the cruelty of the plan lies in its simplicity. If Robert returns safely, another opportunity will almost certainly come. If fate cooperates, Cersei achieves everything without leaving obvious evidence of murder. The hunt itself unfolds beyond the direct eyes of the reader, reported afterward by those who witnessed its aftermath. Robert manages to kill the great boar, despite suffering a catastrophic wound. Even dying, he displays the physical courage that made him legendary during the rebellion. He laughs bitterly about the encounter, remarking that the boar earned its place in song. That moment captures something essential about Robert Baratheon. He remains brave until the end. His tragedy is not cowardice, but carelessness. Courage wins battles, yet it cannot protect a man who steadily abandons discipline. While the king slowly dies, another political clock begins ticking inside the Red Keep. Eddard Stark has already uncovered the truth about the royal children's parentage through Jon Arryn's investigation, the genealogy of the great houses, and his own observations. Rather than immediately seizing Cersei and the children, Ned chooses another path. Faithful to his own code of honor, he privately confronts the queen before revealing the truth publicly. He urges her to flee with Joffrey,
Myrcella, and Tommen before Robert returns from the hunt, believing the king's wrath would spare neither mother nor children. It is one of the most compassionate moments in Ned's story. It is also one of the most consequential. Cersei's reaction reveals extraordinary composure. She does not deny the accusation. She does not invent an elaborate falsehood. Instead, she acknowledges the truth with startling confidence and even speaks openly about her relationship with Jaime. In one of the most memorable exchanges in A Game of Thrones, she tells Ned, "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There's no middle ground." The line has become famous through both book and television adaptation, yet within the novel, it carries a quieter meaning than simple arrogance. She is explaining the rules as she understands them. Mercy belongs to private life. Power does not permit it. Why answer honestly when a lie might seem safer? Because Cersei has already calculated that Robert is unlikely to return alive. This conversation takes place while the king is away hunting. She knows exactly how much wine Lancel has been instructed to provide. She knows Robert's habits better than Ned ever could after only weeks in King's Landing. Most importantly, she understands that if Robert dies before acting, Ned loses the only authority capable of protecting him. Suddenly, the Honorable Lord of Winterfell becomes merely one lord among many, standing inside a city controlled by people whose loyalties he has not yet measured. Robert lingers long enough to dictate his final wishes. Gravely wounded, he names Eddard Stark protector of the realm, until "my son Joffrey" comes of age, believing without question that Joffrey is his true heir. Ned makes one subtle alteration before the document is sealed, changing the wording to "my rightful heir" rather than naming Joffrey directly. The change reflects both legal precision and moral conviction. Ned hopes the document will preserve the lawful succession once Stannis Baratheon's claim becomes known. Yet parchments possess only the authority that living men are willing to enforce. Without swords behind them, even the king's final words can become fragile. Cersei understands this better than almost anyone in Westeros. Laws matter, oaths matter, royal decrees matter, but each depends upon individuals choosing to uphold them. When doing so carries personal risk. Throughout Robert's reign, she has quietly watched ambitious men bend principles whenever convenience demanded it. Littlefinger has grown rich manipulating debts. Pycelle has repeatedly favored House Lannister while maintaining the appearance of impartial service. Janos Slynt commands the City Watch through rewards as much as discipline. One by one, Cersei has measured where loyalty truly ends and self-interest begins. As the king's life fades with each passing hour, the candle beside the window has burned nearly halfway down. Outside, the streets of King's Landing continue as though nothing has changed. Bakers prepare tomorrow's bread, fishermen secure their boats along the Blackwater, and watchmen pace the city walls beneath the stars. Almost no one realizes that the fate of the Seven Kingdoms no longer depends upon whether Robert Baratheon survives the night. It depends upon who is ready to move first when the crown finally slips from his brow. Why did Eddard Stark, one of the most honorable men in Westeros, walk directly into a trap that Cersei seemed to anticipate almost step for step? At first glance, the answer appears simple. Ned trusted where he should have suspected. Cersei deceived where he expected honesty. Littlefinger betrayed where he promised loyalty. Yet the deeper you examine the events, inside the Red Keep during those final days after Robert's death, the less they resemble a series of fortunate accidents for House Lannister. Instead, they reveal two entirely different philosophies of power colliding beneath the same roof, each internally consistent, each shaped by a lifetime of experience, and only one of them suited to surviving King's Landing. Eddard Stark arrived in the capital carrying the political instincts of Winterfell. For nearly 15 years after Robert's rebellion, he had governed the north from the ancient castle whose foundations stretch back to Brandon the Builder, according to tradition. Justice in the north remained personal. The lord who pronounced a sentence swung the sword himself. Oaths carried enormous weight. Great houses such as Manderley, Umber, Karstark, Glover, and Serwyn maintained loyalty through generations of mutual obligation rather than constant intrigue. Conflicts certainly existed, but they unfolded within a culture where reputation often mattered more than manipulation. King's Landing obeyed different rules entirely. Ned recognized corruption almost immediately after becoming Hand of the King, but he underestimated its depth. He discovered that the royal treasury stood millions of gold dragons in debt despite Robert's prosperous inheritance. He learned that Janos Slynt had risen through the city watch by accepting bribes. He watched Littlefinger treat financial chaos almost as entertainment. He observed Grand Maester Pycelle consistently offering advice favorable to House Lannister while presenting himself as a neutral servant of the realm. None of these discoveries pleased him, yet he still believed that legitimate authority could restore order once the truth became public. That belief had served him well in the north. It proved dangerously optimistic in the capital. Cersei, meanwhile, had spent nearly 2 decades studying precisely these weaknesses. She knew Janos Slynt valued advancement more than principle. She understood Pycelle's admiration for her father, Lord Tywin Lannister, ran far deeper than his formal loyalty to the Iron Throne. She had watched Littlefinger accumulate influence through debt, information, and carefully cultivated uncertainty. Most importantly, she recognized that every institution inside King's Landing depended upon individuals rather than ideals. Laws possessed no swords of their own, decrees marched nowhere unless men chose to obey them. The Queen did not need universal loyalty. She only needed enough people to act in the decisive moment. Why then did Ned reveal his knowledge before Robert's death instead of striking immediately? This remains one of the defining choices of his story. Having uncovered the truth about Joffrey's parentage, he privately confronted Cersei rather than arresting her. He urged her to take Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen across the narrow sea before Robert returned, hoping to spare innocent children from the king's inevitable fury. Ned remembered the brutal deaths of Princess Elia Martell, Prince Aegon, and Princess Rhaenys during the sack of King's Landing in 283 AC. He had never forgiven those killings, nor Robert's willingness to accept them afterward. Faced with another generation of royal children, he refused to allow history to repeat itself. This decision illustrates something profound about Ned rather than exposing simple political incompetence. Throughout the novels, his honor is never naive. He understands violence all too well. He fought at the Battle of the Bells, crossed swords during Robert's rebellion, and rode to the Tower of Joy, where only he and Howland Reed, survived the confrontation with Sir Arthur Dane, Sir Oswell Went, and Lord Commander Gerald Hightower. Ned knows exactly what kings are capable of ordering once anger overtakes judgment. His warning to Cersei grows not from ignorance but from mercy. Tragically, mercy requires the other side to recognize its value. Cersei interprets the conversation differently. Instead of hearing compassion, she hears hesitation. Instead of seeing moral strength, she identifies an opening. Her reply remains one of the clearest expressions of her political philosophy. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. In context, the statement is less a boast than an observation. She genuinely believes there exists no stable middle ground between victory and destruction. Every compromise simply postpones the next conflict. Every hesitation invites someone else to seize the advantage. Robert dies before Ned can act, and the balance of power changes instantly. The king's body has scarcely grown cold before questions of succession dominate every conversation. According to the lawful order of inheritance established after the conquest, Stannis Baratheon stands as Robert's rightful heir once Joffrey's illegitimacy becomes known. Yet Stannis remains on Dragonstone. Renly Baratheon has already fled King's Landing after unsuccessfully urging Ned to seize Joffrey and the younger royal children before dawn. Renly's proposal deserves careful attention because it demonstrates that even one of Robert's own brothers understood how quickly legality could become irrelevant once armed men occupied the throne room. Ned refuses, unwilling to imprison children regardless of political necessity. Littlefinger now occupies the most fascinating position in the unfolding crisis. Earlier, he promised to secure the loyalty of the City Watch for Ned Stark. On the surface, the arrangement appears plausible. As Master of Coin, Littlefinger possesses extensive connections throughout the capital, and Janos Slynt has long benefited from his patronage. Ned accepts the promise despite receiving repeated warnings about Petyr Baelish from several directions. Varys advises caution. Even Catelyn Stark once described Littlefinger as clever enough to be dangerous. Yet Ned continues believing shared political interests will outweigh personal ambition. Littlefinger has already concluded exactly the opposite. The throne room scene unfolds with almost unbearable inevitability. Robert's will is presented. Ned attempts to assume his authority as protector of the realm. Joffrey enters wearing the crown. Cersei stands confidently beside her son while members of the small council observe the confrontation. When Ned orders the City Watch to seize the Queen and her children, Janos Slynt instead commands his gold cloaks to kill Stark's household guard. Moments later, Petyr Baelish presses a dagger against Ned's throat and quietly reminds him, "I did warn you not to trust me." The betrayal succeeds because it attacks assumptions rather than armies. It is tempting to conclude that Cersei orchestrated every detail personally. The books suggest a more interesting reality. Littlefinger betrays Ned because disorder serves Littlefinger. Janos Slynt changes sides because advancement serves Janos Slynt. Pycelle quietly supports the Lannisters because he believes their victory best protects the realm, and because his admiration for Tywin has long shaped his judgment. Cersei does not invent their motivations. She recognizes them. This distinction explains much of her effectiveness. Rather than forcing people to become someone new, she allows them to become more fully themselves. What follows happens with astonishing speed. Arya Stark escapes into the labyrinth of King's Landing after Syrio Forel's final stand against Sir Meryn Trant. Sansa Stark remains a hostage within the Red Keep. Jory Cassell and several Stark guards are already dead from Jaime's earlier attack in the streets. Following Tyrion's capture by Catelyn Stark at the Crossroads Inn, the Stark household has been steadily weakened even before Robert's fatal hunt. Looking backward, the trap appears almost complete, long before it finally closes. Ned walks into the throne room believing he is enforcing the law. Cersei enters the same chamber knowing the laws alone have never ruled kingdoms. The candle burns lower, throwing longer shadows across the carved game board, resting upon the heavy table.
Some pieces have already been swept aside. Others still stand exactly where they began, though their fate has already been decided by hands unseen. Outside, dawn remains hours away, but inside the Red Keep, the game has entered a new phase. Cersei has not defeated the strongest warrior or the richest lord. She has defeated the man who believed the truth, once spoken aloud, possessed enough strength to defend itself. Why did Cersei seem strongest at the very moment the realm was falling apart around her? After Eddard Stark's arrest and King Joffrey's accession, the Seven Kingdoms entered one of the bloodiest conflicts since the Dance of the Dragons. Robb Stark was proclaimed king in the north at River Run by the banners of House Stark, House Tully, House Umber, House Mormont, House Karstark, and dozens of northern lords. Stannis Baratheon declared himself Robert's lawful heir from Dragonstone. Renly Baratheon crowned himself with the support of House Tyrell and much of the Reach. Balon Greyjoy once again named himself King of the Iron Islands. 5 kings claimed crowns, yet inside the Red Keep, Cersei remained convinced that the greatest danger still lived within the walls surrounding her. Joffrey's coronation did not solve Cersei's problems. It multiplied them. By every principle of feudal succession, his legitimacy depended upon people accepting him as Robert's true son. Stannis Baratheon's letters shattered that illusion by openly accusing Cersei and Jaime of incest and proclaiming Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen to be illegitimate. Those ravens flew to castles across Westeros, carrying accusations that many recipients had never imagined. Once spoken aloud, the rumor could no longer be contained. Some dismissed it immediately. Others quietly recalled the children's golden hair and Robert's famously dark bloodline. Doubt itself became a weapon. One remarkable detail often escapes notice. Cersei never attempts to answer Stannis through careful legal argument or elaborate genealogy. She understands that succession disputes are rarely decided by scholarship. They are settled by armies, castles, and loyalties. Stannis possesses the stronger legal claim if Joffrey is illegitimate. Renly possesses broader popularity among the great lords. Robb Stark commands fierce devotion in the north. Rather than debating bloodlines, Cersei concentrates on surviving long enough for rivals to weaken one another. It is not a glamorous strategy, but it reflects a clear reading of Westerosi history. The rivalry between Stannis and Renly provides exactly the opportunity she needs. Both brothers descend from Lord Steffon Baratheon and Lady Cassana Estermont.
both command substantial military strength. Yet instead of immediately uniting against the Lannisters, they divide the supporters of House Baratheon. Stannis insists upon strict legality, arguing that Robert's younger brother has no right to precede him. Renly counters with political realism, observing that armies follow strength more readily than birth order. Their disagreement delays coordinated action against King's Landing. Cersei could hardly have designed a more favorable situation if she had planned it herself. Why do independent ambitions so often produce victories for House Lannister? Martin returns to this idea repeatedly throughout A Clash of Kings. Robb Stark marches into the Riverlands to rescue his mother's family and punish the Lannisters for Ned's imprisonment. Balon Greyjoy rejects an alliance with Robb and instead invades the North, pursuing his own dream of restoring the old way. Stannis refuses compromise with Renly because legitimacy matters more to him than convenience. Renly believes charisma outweighs law. None of these men are secretly serving Cersei. Each follows his own convictions. Yet their conflicting priorities grant the Iron Throne precious time. Inside King's Landing, another contest quietly unfolds between Cersei and Tyrion Lannister. Lord Tywin, campaigning in the Riverlands after defeats such as the Battle of the Whispering Wood and the Battle of the Camps, appoints Tyrion acting hand of the king. Tyrion arrives by sea with Bronn, Shae, and the hill tribes he recruited in the Vale after escaping the Eyrie. His mission is straightforward: restore order, strengthen the capital's defenses, and restrain both Joffrey and Cersei before their decisions destroy the regime from within. From his first council meeting, it becomes obvious that brother and sister view power through entirely different lenses. Tyrion trusts information. Cersei trusts control. Tyrion cultivates spies, tests loyalties through carefully planted falsehoods, and attempts to identify leaks within the small council by giving Pycelle, Varys, and Littlefinger different stories regarding Princess Myrcella's proposed marriage. When only Pycelle repeats the exact version intended for him, Tyrion exposes the Grand Maester's divided loyalty and has him imprisoned. It is one of the cleverest political maneuvers in A Clash of Kings. Cersei, however, sees such games as distractions. She believes loyalty should be demanded through fear, family obligation, and unquestioned authority. Their methods occasionally overlap, but their instincts rarely do. Their disagreements become increasingly personal because each recognizes qualities in the other that are difficult to admit. Tyrion sees Cersei's courage, determination, and political intuition. Yet he also witnesses how fear repeatedly distorts her judgment. Cersei acknowledges Tyrion's intelligence while remaining convinced that he seeks to destroy her family. A belief strengthened by Maggie the Frog's prophecy concerning the Valonqar. Their conversations are filled with half-truths, veiled threats, and memories reaching back to childhood. They are siblings bound by blood, yet divided by suspicion, each inheriting different aspects of Tywin's formidable mind. Meanwhile, Varys continues moving quietly through hidden passages beneath the Red Keep. Littlefinger departs for Bitterbridge to negotiate an alliance with House Tyrell after Renly's sudden death at Storm's End, leaving the capital temporarily without one of its most unpredictable players. Janos Slynt is removed from command of the City Watch by Tyrion and sent to the Wall, replaced by Sir Jacelyn Bywater, a veteran whose missing hand earned him the nickname Iron Hand. These administrative changes rarely attract the attention given to famous battles, yet they shape the city's ability to survive the war. Martin repeatedly reminds readers that kingdoms are preserved as much by appointments and supply lines as by heroic charges. Cersei often receives criticism for failing to appreciate Tyrion's administrative talents, and the criticism contains truth. Yet it also obscures something important. She correctly understands that politics is emotional before it is logical. Joffrey terrifies his own subjects through cruelty. Noble families calculate advantage rather than justice. Small folk panic whenever food grows scarce. Even the most carefully constructed plans collapse if fear spreads through a city. Tyrion excels at solving structural problems. Cersei instinctively senses emotional ones. Had the two cooperated instead of competing, House Lannister might have become nearly impossible to challenge. Beyond the walls, the riverlands burn. Harrenhal changes hands. River Run remains defiant. The Golden Tooth guards the western approaches. Dragonstone prepares its fleet while Highgarden weighs its future. Ravens cross the skies carrying declarations of kingship, pleas for aid, and reports of fresh defeats. The realm appears to be tearing itself apart in every direction at once. Yet from Cersei's perspective, every rival army marching against another rival army is another day purchased for the Iron Throne. Sometimes the strongest player is not the one who creates chaos. It is the one who recognizes that chaos has already begun and simply learns how to remain standing while everyone else exhausts themselves. Why did Cersei emerge from the Battle of the Blackwater believing she'd been proven right when the victory itself concealed the beginning of her greatest mistakes? Few battles in the history of Westeros altered the political balance as dramatically as the struggle fought upon the Blackwater Rush in 299 AC. King Stannis Baratheon, commanding the royal fleet taken from Dragonstone, together with the strength of House Florent and his remaining allies, sailed directly toward King's Landing. His reputation for discipline and military competence made him the most dangerous claimant still alive after Renly's death. Inside the capital, fear spread faster than certainty. Food had grown scarce, refugees crowded the streets, and rumors multiplied with every passing day. If the city fell, House Lannister's hold upon the Iron Throne would likely collapse with it. The defense of King's Landing depended upon preparations begun long before Stannis' fleet appeared on the horizon. Acting hand. Tyrion Lannister strengthened the city walls, organized additional defenses, and supervised the secret production of enormous quantities of wildfire with the help of the Alchemists' Guild. The substance itself deserves a moment of attention because it occupies a unique place in Westerosi history. Wildfire burns with unnatural green flames that water cannot extinguish. It had once been stockpiled in great quantities by King Aerys II during the final years of his reign, when the Mad King intended to burn King's Landing rather than surrender it to Robert Baratheon. Jaime Lannister killed Aerys before that madness could be carried out, but the alchemists continued manufacturing smaller supplies afterward. Tyrion transformed wildfire from a hidden danger into a devastating weapon. He ordered a massive chain stretched across the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, concealed beneath the water until the proper moment. As Stannis' fleet advanced into the river, one sacrificial vessel filled with wildfire drifted among the enemy ships. When ignited, the explosion consumed vessel after vessel in green fire, trapping many behind the raised chain. Thousands died within minutes. The river itself appeared to burn. Even hardened veterans who had survived Robert's rebellion found themselves witnessing something that seemed closer to dragon fire than ordinary warfare. While Tyrion fought upon the walls and personally led a sortie through the mud gate, after Sir Mandon Moore's assault nearly killed him, Cersei remained inside Maegor's holdfast with King Tommen. At first glance, this appears to be a passive role. The novels reveal something more complicated. Cersei understood that if the city fell, Stannis would almost certainly execute Joffrey, Tommen, and herself as traitors. She refused to allow Tommen to be captured alive. In one of the darkest moments of A Clash of Kings, she prepared poisoned wine, intending to spare her younger son torture or public execution should the defenses collapse. Whether readers agree with the choice or recoil from it, the decision reflects a mother acting according to the brutal logic she believes governs the world. Why is this moment so often overlooked when discussing Cersei's intelligence? Because it demonstrates that she distinguishes between hope and preparation. She hopes Tyrion and the defenders succeed. She prepares for failure regardless. Throughout the novels, Cersei repeatedly assumes that enemies will show little mercy if given the opportunity. History gives her reason to believe this. She remembers the deaths of Elia Martell and her children during the sack of King's Landing. She knows what happened to rival claimants throughout Targaryen history. Westeros offers very few examples of defeated royal families living peacefully afterward. In her mind, survival requires planning for the worst long before it arrives. The battle reaches its turning point not because of anything happening within the city, but because of decisions made many leagues away. After Renly Baratheon's death beneath mysterious circumstances, outside Storm's End, much of the strength of the Reach gradually shifts toward House Lannister through negotiations conducted by Peter Baelish. Lord Mace Tyrell commits his banners to the new alliance. Most importantly, Lord Tywin Lannister abandons his western campaign and marches rapidly toward King's Landing, with fresh forces joined by Sir Loras Tyrell and thousands of Reach cavalry. Their arrival transforms near defeat into overwhelming victory. Stannis' exhausted soldiers suddenly find themselves attacked from multiple directions after already suffering catastrophic naval losses. This outcome raises an uncomfortable question. Whose victory was the Blackwater, really? Tyrion designed the city's defenses. The Alchemists' Guild supplied wildfire. The Gold Cloaks and Defenders held the walls through desperate fighting. Tywin and the Tyrell host delivered the decisive blow from outside. Sir Garland Tyrell, wearing Renly's armor according to the novels, contributed to the collapse of Stannis' army by spreading confusion among former supporters of Renly. Cersei herself commanded no battlefield formation, yet when the dust settled, she remained Queen Regent inside a city that had survived against extraordinary odds. Her relationship with Tyrion changes permanently after the battle. Instead of acknowledging his central role in saving the capital, Cersei increasingly views him with suspicion. Tyrion had won admiration from soldiers, officers, and many members of the court. He had also demonstrated an ability to govern independently of her wishes. For someone shaped by Maggie the Frog's prophecy and years of political struggle, such popularity could easily appear threatening. Fear once again began reshaping judgment. The brother who had helped preserve House Lannister gradually became another rival in her imagination. Tywin's return also transforms the balance of authority within the Red Keep. Resuming the office of Hand of the King, he immediately restores the disciplined administration that had characterized his earlier service under Aerys II. He negotiates marriages, reorganizes the small council, secures the alliance with House Tyrell, and quietly limits Cersei's influence over many governmental decisions. Their conversations reveal mutual frustration rather than affection. Tywin repeatedly criticizes Cersei's impulsiveness while praising neither her nor Tyrion openly. Cersei, in turn, resents being treated as a child despite having preserved the throne during its most dangerous crisis. Father and daughter resemble one another so closely that cooperation often becomes impossible. Another subtle consequence follows the battle. The common people of King's Landing remember hunger, wildfire, and terror far more vividly than political speeches. Riots had already broken out before Stannis arrived. At one point, Cersei herself was attacked by an angry crowd while returning from the Great Sept of Baelor, and High Sept in attendance were torn apart by desperate small folk. Those memories do not vanish simply because the city survives. Victory on the battlefield cannot erase fear in the streets. Martin consistently reminds readers that kings rule populations, not merely castles, and populations possess memories of their own. There is also an irony hidden within Cersei's apparent triumph. Many of the achievements securing the Lannister position originate with people she neither fully trusts nor entirely understands. Tyrion organizes the defense. Tywin delivers the relief army. Petyr Baelish secures the Tyrell alliance. Varys quietly keeps vital information flowing beneath the surface. Even Sir Jacelyn Bywater, commander of the City Watch, dies faithfully, defending the city after replacing Janos Slynt. Cersei benefits from all of these efforts, yet increasingly concludes that she alone grasped what was necessary. Confidence slowly begins hardening into certainty. The candle has nearly burned to its final third, and beyond the window the first faint hint of dawn waits somewhere beyond the eastern horizon. The bells of King's Landing no longer ring in alarm. Smoke from burned ships drifts across Blackwater Bay, mixing with the smell of salt and ash. Survivors congratulate one another, songs begin taking shape, and the realm believes the Iron Throne has weathered its greatest storm. Yet some victories hide dangers that defeat never could. For Cersei Lannister, the Blackwater proves not only that she can survive the game, but that she has started believing she no longer needs anyone else to teach her how it is played. Why did Cersei become more dangerous after gaining greater power, yet less effective at ruling than she had ever been before? The death of Lord Tywin Lannister at the end of A Storm of Swords marks one of the great turning points in the history of House Lannister, killed in the Tower of the Hand by Tyrion Lannister with a crossbow while seated upon the privy. Tywin leaves behind immense wealth, unmatched political influence, and a family already beginning to fracture from within. King Joffrey has already died at his wedding feast, Young King Tommen now wears the crown. Tyrion has fled across the narrow sea after murdering both Tywin and Shae. Jaime has abandoned many of the assumptions that once defined his life. Into that vacuum steps Queen Regent Cersei, convinced that she has spent years watching others rule badly and that the time has finally come to govern according to her own judgment. Her confidence is understandable. She has survived Robert's reign, Ned Stark's investigation, the War of the Five Kings, the Battle of the Blackwater, and the political storms surrounding Joffrey's death. Every major rival who once seemed invincible has fallen. Robert Baratheon is dead. Eddard Stark has been executed. Renly Baratheon lies buried near Storm's End. Robb Stark has been murdered at the Twins during the Red Wedding. Tywin himself is gone. Stannis has been driven back to Dragonstone after Blackwater. Looking across the board, Cersei sees enemies defeated one after another. She reaches an understandable conclusion. If she has survived while stronger players disappeared, perhaps she was stronger all along. Yet survival and administration are not the same skill. Tywin understood the governing required surrounding oneself with competent servants, even unpleasant ones. During his years as Hand to Aerys II and later as Hand to Joffrey, he repeatedly relied upon experienced officers, veteran Castellans, disciplined commanders, and capable administrators. Personal affection mattered little. Results mattered greatly. Cersei instead begins selecting advisors according to a different standard. She increasingly values agreement over competence. Those who flatter her judgment receive advancement. Those who question it gradually lose influence. One of the clearest examples is Aurane Waters, the handsome young bastard of House Valyrian. Aurane possesses Valyrian features with silver gold hair and purple eyes that remind many observers of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Cersei notices the resemblance immediately. She raises him to Master of Ships after dismissing or alienating more experienced figures, entrusting him with rebuilding the royal fleet. On paper, the appointment appears bold rather than reckless. Aurane has naval experience and comes from a family long associated with the sea. In practice, she is elevated a relatively untested man, largely because she enjoys his appearance and finds his loyalty reassuring. The distinction becomes critical later, when Aurane sails away with the very fleet she financed, proclaiming himself Lord of the Waters. Why does Cersei repeatedly mistake admiration for loyalty? Part of the answer lies in her lifelong struggle against disrespect. From childhood, she watched capable men receive authority simply because they were born male. Jaime trained with swords, while she learned courtly accomplishments. Tyrion, despite his dwarfism, remained eligible to inherit Casterly Rock until Tywin's death because succession followed established law. Cersei frequently reflects that had she been born a son, she believes she would have equaled or surpassed Jaime as heir to House Lannister. That frustration is genuine, yet it gradually leads her toward a dangerous assumption. Anyone who criticizes her decisions must be motivated by prejudice rather than legitimate concern. Her relationship with Sir Kevan Lannister illustrates this transformation beautifully. Kevan, Tywin's younger brother, spent decades serving House Lannister with quiet efficiency. He commanded troops, managed estates, negotiated alliances, and remained consistently loyal without seeking glory. After Tywin's death, Kevan offers experienced counsel, grounded in long observation. Cersei hears instead an attempt to limit her authority. Their disagreements become increasingly bitter, till Kevin withdraws from court altogether. In A Dance with Dragons, Varys later reflects that Kevin possessed precisely the steady competence the realm desperately needed. Cersei mistakes independence for opposition and, in doing so, weakens her own government. Her suspicion extends beyond family. The alliance with House Tyrell, forged after Renly's death and cemented through King Tommen's marriage to Margaery Tyrell, should represent the strongest political partnership in Westeros. The Reach supplies food, wealth, and the largest armies remaining loyal to the Iron Throne. Lord Mace Tyrell seeks prestige. Lady Olenna Tyrell possesses extraordinary political insight. Sir Loras Tyrell commands great respect despite his youth. Together they stabilize a kingdom exhausted by war. Cersei instead views nearly every Tyrell success as evidence of an elaborate conspiracy to replace House Lannister at the center of power. There are understandable reasons for her concern. Maggie the Frog's prophecy promised that another queen, younger and more beautiful, would cast her down and take everything she held dear. Margaery Tyrell fits that description alarmingly well. She is young, admired by the people, politically useful, and now married to King Tommen after Joffrey's death. Whether Margaery herself harbors ambitions matching Cersei's fears remains deliberately ambiguous in the novels. The reader sees Margaery mostly through the eyes of others, rather than from her own perspective. Cersei, however, no longer distinguishes between prophecy and evidence. Every smile from the young queen becomes another piece of Maggie's prediction unfolding before her eyes. This fear steadily reshapes policy. Rather than strengthening the partnership with House Tyrell, Cersei begins searching for ways to undermine it. She surrounds Margaery with spies, encourages accusations against her household, and looks constantly for proof of treason or adultery. In several cases, she attempts to manufacture circumstances that will produce the very evidence she seeks. Martin quietly demonstrates how paranoia alters perception. Once Cersei accepts a conclusion, every new event appears to confirm it regardless of alternative explanations. Intelligence without self-correction gradually becomes self-deception. Meanwhile, Jaime Lannister continues changing in directions Cersei neither expects nor appreciates. After losing his sword hand to Vargo Hoat's brave companions, Jaime undergoes one of the most profound internal transformations in the novels. Returning to King's Landing physically diminished, but morally more reflective, he begins questioning many assumptions that once governed his life. He burns Cersei's letter begging for rescue from the faith in a feast for crows, choosing instead to continue restoring order in the Riverlands after the fall of Riverrun. Their lifelong partnership quietly begins unraveling. Cersei interprets his growing independence as abandonment. Jaime increasingly sees how deeply fear has begun directing his sister's choices. Another pattern emerges during these years. Cersei becomes convinced that she alone truly understands Tywin's methods. She often asks herself what her father would have done before making major decisions, yet she imitates only part of his example. Tywin certainly employed intimidation, ruthless punishment, and overwhelming force when necessary, as houses Reyne and Tarbeck learned decades earlier. He also possessed remarkable patience, delegated authority effectively, and tolerated disagreement from capable subordinates when it improved results. Cersei embraces the first qualities while neglecting the second. She inherits the appearance of Tywin's strength without always reproducing its foundation. The candle burns steadily, though the room now feels emptier than before. The towering figure of Tywin Lannister no longer walks these corridors, and the voices that once challenged Cersei have grown quieter one by one. Outside King's Landing appears peaceful. Compared to the years of open war, markets reopen, ships crowd the harbor, the Iron Throne seems secure beneath young King Tommen, yet silence can be deceptive. Sometimes the greatest danger enters a kingdom not when enemies gather outside its walls, but when no one inside the walls remains willing to tell a ruler that she is making a mistake. Why would the woman who spent her entire life fighting for power willingly restore one of the few institutions capable of taking that power away? At first, the decision appears almost impossible to explain. Cersei Lannister has outmaneuvered rivals, survived wars, and watched kingdoms tear themselves apart because ambitious men refuse to surrender authority. Yet during her regency for King Tommen, she revives the faith militant, an armed religious order that previous Targaryen kings had spent generations suppressing. The consequences echo through every remaining chapter of A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. Looking back, this choice marks the clearest moment when political brilliance begins giving way to political overconfidence. To understand the magnitude of the decision, you must travel centuries into the past. During the reign of King Maegor the First Targaryen, remembered as Maegor the Cruel, the faith militant rose in armed resistance against Targaryen rule, objecting to incestuous royal marriages and dragon-backed authority. The warriors' sons and the poor fellows fought bloody campaigns across the Seven Kingdoms before eventually being crushed. Later, King Jaehaerys the First Targaryen secured lasting peace through diplomacy rather than endless war. One of his greatest achievements was persuading the faith to abandon its military orders permanently. For nearly 3 centuries afterward, the faith of the Seven remained spiritually influential but militarily powerless. Every ruler since Jaehaerys benefited from that settlement. Cersei casually dismantles it. The opportunity arises because the crown owes enormous debts to the faith. Years of Robert Baratheon's extravagant spending, costly wars, and financial mismanagement have left royal obligations unpaid. The newly elevated High Septon, soon known throughout the realm simply as the High Sparrow, refuses to behave like many of his predecessors. Unlike richly dressed Septons who surrounded themselves with luxury inside the great Sept of Baelor, this humble leader arrives barefoot, wearing rough robes, living among the poor, and preaching repentance. His influence grows rapidly because famine, warfare, and suffering have left countless small folk searching for moral certainty. Cersei sees only an old man leading pious followers. She fails to recognize that she is confronting one of the most politically gifted religious leaders Westeros has seen in generations. Their first meetings reveal 2 entirely different understandings of power. Cersei believes wealth creates authority. The High Sparrow believes authority comes from moral legitimacy. Gold, castles, and noble blood impress her because they have shaped her entire life. The High Sparrow deliberately rejects such symbols. He listens to widows, orphans, beggars, and wounded veterans whose lives have been shattered by the War of the Five Kings. Thousands begin viewing him not merely as a religious figure, but as the only leader who appears untouched by greed. Circe measures strength through noble houses. The High Sparrow measures it through belief. Each understands a different kingdom. Why does she restore the faith militant instead of simply paying the crown's debts? Because she believes she has discovered an elegant political shortcut in exchange for forgiving what the Iron Throne owes the faith. She authorizes the warriors' sons and poor fellows to bear arms once more. On paper, the arrangement appears beneficial to both sides. The crown reduces crushing financial obligations. The faith regains ancient privileges. The queen assumes that grateful religious leaders will naturally support the monarchy that restored them. It is a calculation remarkably similar to several earlier successes in her career. Reward someone, create dependence, secure loyalty. The flaw lies in one assumption. The High Sparrow does not see himself as Circe's client. Unlike Geno Slint, Pycelle, or Arain Waters, he has no interest in advancement through royal favor. Unlike Littlefinger, he does not seek wealth. Unlike Varys, he does not pursue hidden dynastic restoration. His authority comes from an entirely separate source. Every armed brother joining the faith militant answers first to religious vows rather than royal commands. Circe restores an institution that possesses independent legitimacy, independent manpower, and independent objectives. Once those swords exist again, they no longer belong to her. The consequences emerge slowly, then all at once. Circe attempts to destroy Marguerite Tyrell by arranging accusations of adultery through compromised witnesses, including Sir Osney Kettleblack. Her expectation is simple. The faith arrests Marjorie, humiliates House Tyrell, and strengthens House Lannister's position. Initially, events seem to follow that script. Marjorie is indeed taken into custody, together with several of her cousins. Circe congratulates herself on another successful move against the younger queen she believes Maggie the Frog foretold decades earlier. Then the High Sparrow asks a far more dangerous question. If queens must answer for their sins, why should one queen receive different justice than another? The investigation widens with astonishing speed. Osney Kettleblack, tortured and questioned, confesses not only to false testimony against Margaery, but to adultery with Circe herself, precisely as she had instructed him to claim regarding someone else. Other accusations begin surfacing. Rumors concerning incest, manipulation, and corruption return with renewed force. The machinery Circe built for someone else's destruction quietly turns toward its creator. This pattern appears throughout Martin's work. Characters who believe they can permanently direct institutions often discover that institutions eventually develop momentum of their own. Why does Circe fail to anticipate this? Because throughout her adult life, almost every powerful organization she encountered could ultimately be influenced through family, wealth, fear, or political necessity. The City Watch accepted promotion. Noble houses accepted marriages. Counselors accepted offices. Even kings often accepted convenient lies. The faith under the High Sparrow proves fundamentally different. It seeks obedience to divine law rather than political advantage. Whether readers believe the High Sparrow sincerely holy, ruthlessly calculating, or some combination of both, his consistency catches Circe completely off guard. She cannot easily manipulate a man who genuinely believes eternal judgment outweighs earthly reward. Her arrest becomes one of the most extraordinary reversals in the entire saga. The Queen Regent of the Seven Kingdoms, mother of the king, daughter of Tywin Lannister, finds herself imprisoned inside the great sept of Baelor by men she personally empowered. Her jewels are removed, her servants disappear, messages fail to reach loyal allies. She repeatedly expects rescue from Jaime, from Kevin, from the crown, from someone. Instead, silence answers her. The walls of her cell are plain stone. Titles mean very little there. In those lonely chambers, Cersei spends more time confronting herself than she ever has before. Memories of Maggie the Frog return with relentless clarity. She wonders whether the prophecy has finally caught up with her or whether she has carried it toward fulfillment through every fearful decision made since childhood. The novels do not ask you to pity her without reservation. They ask you to understand the chain of choices linking the frightened girl in Lannisport to the imprisoned queen beneath the great sept. Intelligence carried her to extraordinary heights. Fear quietly transformed that intelligence into a prison long before the faith ever locked the door. The candle has become a thin pillar of wavering light. Beyond the windows of King's Landing, the city remains asleep, unaware that the queen who once seemed untouchable now kneels upon cold stone beneath the very sept whose armed protectors she restored with her own signature. Some mistakes arrive in an instant, others spend years disguising themselves as brilliant decisions before revealing what they truly were. Why does Cersei Lannister remain one of the most fiercely debated political minds in all of A Song of Ice and Fire? The answer lies in a contradiction that George R.R.R. Martin carefully preserves throughout the novels. She is neither the incompetent ruler some readers describe, nor the flawless strategist imagined by her admirers. Instead, she succeeds brilliantly in one kind of political struggle and fails dramatically in another. Her greatest victories come while she is constrained by stronger figures, unpredictable circumstances, and immediate danger. Her greatest failures begin only after she acquires enough authority to trust herself without restraint. Few characters illustrate the difference between political instinct and effective government so completely. Compare her first to her father, Lord Tywin Lannister. Both understand intimidation. Both recognize that appearances influence reality. Both believe mercy must sometimes yield to necessity. Yet Tywin almost never allows personal resentment to dictate state policy. When he orchestrates the Red Wedding through Lord Walder Frey and Lord Rose Bolton, he does so because he calculates that ending the Northern War in a single stroke will preserve Lannister power more effectively than years of campaigning. Whether readers condemn the act morally is a separate question. Politically, it follows a cold, strategic logic. Cersei, by contrast, increasingly shapes policy around private fears, especially her suspicion of Margaery Tyrell in the shadow cast by Maggie's prophecy. Her relationship with Tyrion reveals a similar contrast. Tyrion repeatedly wins through flexibility. During his escape from the Vale, he recruits the mountain clans by offering weapons and opportunity instead of demanding loyalty. As acting hand, he adapts constantly to changing conditions, replacing Janos Slynt, testing Pycelle, strengthening the Mud Gate,
and preparing wildfire defenses without assuming that yesterday's plan will solve tomorrow's problem. Cersei often begins with equally sharp instincts, but once she reaches a conclusion, she rarely revises it. Every new piece of evidence is interpreted through decisions she has already made. In politics, certainty can become more dangerous than ignorance. Then there is Petyr Baelish, perhaps the only player whose methods differ completely from everyone else. Born the minor lord of the Fingers, with little land and few soldiers, Littlefinger constructs influence from finance, information, and calculated disorder. He engineers Jon Arryn's murder through Lysa Arryn, betrays Ned Stark, negotiates the Tyrell alliance, and ultimately secures control of the Vale through marriage and manipulation. Chaos, as he famously tells Sansa Stark in the television adaptation, is a ladder. The novels never phrase it exactly that way, but his actions communicate the same philosophy. Cersei creates stability for House Lannister whenever possible. Littlefinger deliberately destroys stability because instability elevates people willing to exploit it. Varys occupies yet another category entirely. His long game stretches beyond individual reigns. Toward the restoration of the young man he presents as Prince Aegon Targaryen in A Dance with Dragons. Every whisper, every hidden passage beneath the Red Keep, every child carrying secret messages serves a design extending across decades. Unlike Cersei, Varys willingly sacrifices immediate advantage if it strengthens his ultimate objective. He watches kings rise and fall with remarkable patience. Even after fleeing King's Landing, he quietly returns to murder Grand Maester Pycelle and Kevan Lannister, explaining the peace under capable rulers would interfere with the conflict needed for Aegon's arrival. His perspective measures years where others measure days. Why then do so many readers continue arguing that Cersei was the smartest player despite these formidable rivals? Because intelligence in Martin's world refuses simple rankings. Tywin excels at administration but cannot truly understand his children. Tyrion solves immediate crises while repeatedly underestimating the emotional damage carried by those closest to him. Littlefinger manipulates nearly everyone, yet his lifelong obsession with Catelyn Stark and later Sansa introduces vulnerabilities no rational planner would welcome. Varys possesses extraordinary patience, but remains dependent upon a restoration that has not yet succeeded. Cersei, meanwhile, survives impossible situations through instinct, boldness, and an uncanny ability to recognize moments demanding immediate action. Each brilliance carries its own blind spot. The unfinished state of the novels makes the question even richer. As A Dance with Dragons concludes, Cersei has completed her walk of atonement after confessing to adultery while steadfastly denying incest and the murder of King Robert. She returns to the Red Keep physically diminished but politically alive. Her champion for the coming trial by combat is Sir Robert Strong, the immense silent knight created through Qyburn's disturbing experiments upon the dying body, widely believed by readers to be Sir Gregor Clegane, though the novels never confirm this openly. Kevan Lannister has temporarily restored order before Varys assassinates him. Young Aegon has landed in the Stormlands with the Golden Company. Daenerys Targaryen remains across the Narrow Sea with dragons. The game is far from finished. This unfinished ending also highlights one important distinction between the books and the television adaptation.
The later seasons of the series carry Cersei far beyond the published novels, giving her story a completed conclusion that does not yet exist in Martin's written canon. Any final judgment upon her political legacy within the books must therefore remain provisional. The woman imprisoned by the faith, haunted by prophecy, and preparing for trial is not necessarily the last version of Cersei readers will ever encounter. Martin has repeatedly transformed characters in unexpected but internally consistent ways. Until the Winds of Winter appears, her final move remains unwritten. Perhaps that uncertainty is exactly where Cersei belongs. Throughout her life, she has stood between competing interpretations: loving mother or ruthless queen, visionary strategist or paranoid ruler, victim of prophecy or architect of her own downfall. Every label explains part of her without containing the whole. Martin rarely creates characters who fit neatly into moral categories, and Cersei may be among his most intricate achievements. Her chapters invite admiration, frustration, sympathy, and alarm, often within the same few pages. Return now to the quiet room where our journey began. The candle has almost burned itself away, its flame no longer tall and confident, but small enough to flicker with each breath of wind slipping through the narrow window overlooking King's Landing. The carved pieces upon the game board remain scattered across the table. Some kings have fallen, some queens have endured, others still wait beyond the edge of the board, preparing moves no one inside the castle yet suspects.
And beside that fading light sits the memory of a woman who understood one truth earlier than almost anyone else. In Westeros, the most dangerous player is not always the one holding the crown, but the one who learns how every other hand reaches for it. Why does George R.R. Martin refused to give readers a simple answer about Cersei Lannister's intelligence? Even after thousands of pages spent inside her mind, the temptation is always to sort rulers into tidy categories: wise or foolish, strong or weak, hero or villain. Martin consistently resists those divisions. Instead, he constructs a world where strengths become weaknesses when carried too far, and where a single admirable quality, whether honor, courage, patience, or ambition, can become destructive when left unchecked. Cersei is one of the clearest expressions of that philosophy, because nearly every flaw that destroys her grows directly out of the instincts that once kept her alive. Consider the pattern stretching across her entire life. As a child at Casterly Rock, she learns that power protects while affection disappears. At King's Landing, she discovers that hesitation invites defeat, just as Ned Stark's hesitation allows her family to seize the throne. During Robert's reign, she survives because she assumes the worst about nearly everyone around her. During the War of the Five Kings, that same instinct enables her to prepare for disaster, while others cling to optimism. Every lesson reinforces the next. By the time she becomes Queen Regent in her own right, caution has hardened into suspicion, suspicion into certainty, and certainty into isolation. This transformation becomes especially striking when compared with Jaime Lannister. The twins begin life almost inseparable, sharing secrets, ambitions, and an understanding that no one else fully possesses. Yet their paths gradually move in opposite directions. Jaime loses his sword hand, the very gift upon which he built his identity, and begins questioning who he truly is without it. Cersei gains greater authority than ever before and becomes increasingly convinced she has finally become the person she was always meant to be:
One sibling is humbled by loss, the other is reinforced by success. Martin quietly asks which journey is actually more dangerous. The answer is not obvious. Jaime slowly learns to distrust his own reputation. He reflects upon Eris II, upon the wildfire hidden beneath King's Landing, upon the vows he broke to save 500,000 innocent lives, and upon the nickname Kingslayer that has followed him ever since. He becomes more willing to listen than he was in his youth. Cersei moves in the opposite direction. Every victory convinces her that earlier doubts came from lesser minds unable to appreciate her vision. Neither path is comfortable. Yet only one allows room for correction. Why does prophecy hold such power over someone who prides herself on controlling events? Maggie the Frog speaks only a handful of sentences, yet those words echo through every Cersei chapter. Readers sometimes debate whether prophecy in Martin's world is fixed, or whether attempts to avoid it actually bring it to pass. The books deliberately refuse to settle the question. Daenerys Targaryen receives visions in the House of the Undying, whose meanings remain uncertain. Melisandre repeatedly misinterprets what she sees within the flames, despite possessing genuine supernatural gifts. Dreams sent to Bran Stark contain truth wrapped in symbols. Cersei's prophecy belongs to that same tradition. It never forces her hand. It influences the mind that chooses where the hand will move. Many readers have proposed alternate interpretations of the Valonqar. The High Valyrian word simply means little brother. Cersei assumes it refers to Tyrion because he is both younger than she is and the sibling she has hated since Joanna's death. Others argue that Jaime, born moments after Cersei despite being her twin, technically satisfies the wording. Still others have suggested more distant possibilities, though the text provides less direct support for them. Martin's choice of an untranslated Valyrian term rather than a common tongue equivalent seems deliberate. It keeps the prophecy precise enough to shape Cersei's actions while remaining ambiguous enough that certainty becomes impossible. The younger, more beautiful queen offers another enduring mystery. Cersei immediately identifies Margaery Tyrell as the fulfillment of Maggie's warning, and much of her policy follows from that assumption. Yet the novels never confirm she is correct. Daenerys Targaryen, with her youth, beauty, and growing power across the Narrow Sea, also fits the description in obvious ways. Some readers have even suggested Sansa Stark, whose political education continues quietly throughout the series, under Peter Baelish's guidance in The Vale. Martin leaves every possibility alive because the prophecy functions best when neither readers nor characters possess complete certainty. Fear expands to fill every unanswered question. There is another irony hidden beneath Cersei's story. Throughout her life, she insists that men underestimate women, and she is often correct. Robert dismisses her intelligence. Many lords view queens primarily through marriage alliances rather than independent authority. Even Tywin repeatedly treats her as less capable than Jaime, despite recognizing weaknesses in both of his elder children. These prejudices genuinely exist within Westerosi society, yet Cersei eventually commits a remarkably similar mistake herself. She underestimates the High Sparrow because he dresses like a poor pilgrim. She underestimates Orain Waters because she judges him through attraction rather than discipline. She underestimates Marguerite because she sees only youth instead of political adaptability. The very blindness she condemns in others gradually becomes her own. Perhaps that is Martin's quietest lesson. Intelligence is never permanent. It is a habit requiring constant correction. Tywin fails to understand the emotional damage within his own family. Tyrion repeatedly allows bitterness to cloud compassion. Varys may be pursuing a restoration whose consequences he cannot fully predict. Littlefinger believes he can indefinitely balance lies without eventually becoming trapped inside one. Cersei convinces herself that surviving every crisis proves she has mastered the game forever. Every brilliant player eventually discovers a position where earlier experience no longer provides every answer. Outside the Tower of the Hand, dawn has finally begun washing pale light across the rooftops of King's Landing. Smoke rises from countless chimneys. Fishermen prepare their boats along the black water. Bells ring softly from distant septs, welcoming another ordinary morning. Yet within the castle, the game never truly pauses. New letters arrive, fresh alliances form, old promises quietly dissolve before breakfast is served. The candle that guided us through the night has become little more than a glowing ember, but before it disappears entirely, one final question remains, waiting beside its fading light. Was Cersei Lannister ultimately defeated because she was less intelligent than her rivals, or because even the sharpest mind cannot forever escape the fears it has carried since childhood? Why does the image of Cersei Lannister still linger long after the final page, refusing to settle into either triumph or tragedy? Perhaps because she embodies one of the oldest questions in history. Does power reveal who someone truly is, or does it slowly reshape them into someone even they no longer recognize? Martin never answers directly. Instead, he leaves us with a queen whose victories cannot erase her failures, and whose failures cannot erase the brilliance that made those victories possible in the first place. If you follow Cersei's life from beginning to end as it currently stands in the published novels, a striking pattern emerges. As a girl in Casterly Rock, she studies the adults around her because she possesses no authority of her own. As Robert's queen, she survives by observing weaknesses more carefully than anyone suspects. During the struggle against Ned Stark, she acts decisively while others hesitate. During the War of the Five Kings, she remains standing as rival kings destroy one another across the Riverlands, the Reach, the Stormlands, and the North. Those are not accidents. They are the achievements of someone who understands timing, perception, and human fear at an exceptional level. Every one of those accomplishments belongs fully within the canon. Then the pattern changes. Once she becomes the unquestioned center of authority, the careful observer slowly disappears. Instead of studying rivals, she begins assuming she already understands them. Instead of testing assumptions, she trusts instinct alone. Instead of gathering advisors whose strengths differ from her own, she surrounds herself with voices that echo what she already believes. The same confidence that once allowed her to stand before Eddard Stark without flinching gradually hardens into certainty that no correction is necessary. In politics, that transformation is often more dangerous than defeat itself. Enemies can sometimes be overcome. Certainty is much harder to escape. There is another lesson hidden beneath her story, one that reaches beyond House Lannister or the Iron Throne. Every major political player in A Song of Ice and Fire loses something essential because of a single dominant quality. Eddard Stark trusts honor even inside a court that rewards deception. Tywin Lannister values legacy more highly than affection, leaving wounds inside his own family that no military victory can repair. Stannis Baratheon pursues justice with such rigidity that compromise becomes nearly impossible. Petyr Baelish mistakes cleverness for invulnerability. Cersei trusts her own perception until it gradually replaces reality. Martin does not argue that these qualities are worthless. He suggests that every virtue carried beyond balance becomes a flaw. That is why comparisons between Cersei and the television adaptation deserve careful attention. In the later seasons of the series, her reign extends far beyond the material currently available in the books, culminating in events that have not yet occurred in Martin's published narrative. The novels leave her at a far more uncertain point. She has completed her walk of atonement, returned to the Red Keep under guard, and awaits trial. Sir Robert Strong stands ready as her champion. The Golden Company has landed in Westeros under the banner of the young man claiming to be Aegon Targaryen. Daenerys Targaryen remains beyond the Narrow Sea with Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. Winter advances. The others gather beyond the wall. Cersei's final chapter has not yet been written, and that uncertainty matters. It also reminds us that Martin consistently builds stories in which political victories rarely remain permanent. Aegon the Conqueror united 6 kingdoms by dragonfire, yet Dorne resisted for generations. King Jaehaerys I established one of the longest and most peaceful reigns in Targaryen history, yet the Dance of the Dragons erupted less than a century after his death. Robert Baratheon overthrew a dynasty that had ruled for nearly 300 years, only for his own line to fracture within 15 years of taking the throne. Westeros remembers no lasting winner. It remembers only those who held power for a little while before history demanded another turn. Perhaps that is why the image of Cersei beside a candle feels so fitting. She spends her entire life trying to master events that remain larger than any single ruler. Prophecy, dynastic succession, famine, war, religion, ancient grudges between houses, and the unpredictable hearts of her own children all refuse complete control. She can influence them. Sometimes she shapes them brilliantly. She can never command them completely. No monarch in Martin's world ever can. So was Cersei the smartest player in the Game of Thrones? The evidence suggests a more interesting answer than either yes or no. She was one of the most instinctively gifted political survivors in the history of the 7 kingdoms. She read fear with extraordinary precision. She understood appearances better than many celebrated statesmen. She recognized hesitation faster than almost any rival and exploited it without mercy. Yet the very mind that saved her again and again slowly became trapped inside assumptions it no longer questioned. Her greatest opponent was never Eddard Stark, Stannis Baratheon, Margaery Tyrell, Tyrion Lannister, or even the High Sparrow. It was the growing conviction that she'd finally become incapable of making a serious mistake. The candle that welcomed us into the Tower of the Hand has almost disappeared. Only a small pool of wax remains beneath the blackened wick, and the last flame trembles against the morning breeze drifting through the narrow window.
Outside King's Landing wakes, as it always has. Merchants open their stalls. Gold cloaks change watch upon the city gates. Ravens rise into the pale sky, carrying news toward Winterfell, Old Town, River Run, Sunspear, and the Wall. The carved pieces upon the game board have not moved since we first entered the room, yet every one of them now seems different because you know the hands that placed them there, and the quiet certainty that guided one queen through nearly every move until the game itself became impossible to distinguish from the fear she carried within her all along. When you spend enough time in George R.R. Martin's world, you begin to notice that power itself is almost never the true subject of the story. Power is only the lantern carried through a much darker landscape. What Martin returns to again and again is the way people interpret the world around them. Eddard Stark believes honor can preserve a kingdom. Tywin Lannister believes fear can preserve one. Varys trusts patience. Littlefinger trusts chaos. Stannis trusts law, and Cersei trusts her own ability to see danger before anyone else. None of them are entirely wrong. None of them are entirely right. Their triumphs come from the moments when their guiding belief matches the world as it truly is, and their ruin begins when the world quietly changes while they continue following the same path. That is why Cersei remains so compelling long after the last page closes. It is easy to call her cruel, and often she is. It is easy to call her brilliant, and often she deserves that praise as well. Yet neither description reaches the heart of her story. Her greatest gift is perception. She notices weakness that others overlook, hears the hesitation hidden beneath polite words, and understands the crown's rest upon fragile human choices rather than cold iron. Her greatest flaw is that she slowly loses the ability to question her own perceptions. Once fear becomes the lens through which every face is judged, every stranger begins to resemble an enemy, every coincidence begins to resemble a conspiracy, and every prophecy seems to tighten around the future with impossible certainty. Perhaps that is Martin's quiet warning to every ruler, every lord, and every dreamer who reaches for authority. Intelligence alone is never enough. Courage alone is never enough. Even honor, compassion, discipline, or love become dangerous when they harden into certainty. The Seven Kingdoms survive not because perfect rulers occasionally appear, but because history refuses to leave any ruler unchanged. Every reign is tested by drought, war, betrayal, pride, grief, or time itself. The throne never simply reveals character. It grinds against it until hidden cracks begin to show. If you listen closely, another pattern emerges beneath all the battles, councils, betrayals, and prophecies. Castles endure longer than kings. Great houses outlive the men and women who believe themselves indispensable. Even dragons vanish, only for stories about them to linger across centuries. Children inherit victories they did not win and feuds they never began. Seasons continue their slow turning without asking whether a ruler deserved another year. Against that immense passage of time, even the fiercest political struggle becomes only one chapter in a much older history. That perspective gives Martin's world its peculiar sadness, but also its strange peace. And so we return to the room where our journey began. The candle beside the narrow window has finally burned to its end, leaving only the faint scent of cooling wax upon the table. Dawn has fully reached King's Landing now, washing the towers of the Red Keep in pale gold,
while the carved game board rests exactly where it was, its pieces silent beneath the morning light. The voices that argued, plotted, loved, feared, and ruled have faded into memory, but the questions they leave behind remain. As the city wakes beyond the window and the last ember slips quietly into darkness, you are left with the same stillness that greeted us at the beginning, and with the quiet understanding that in Westeros, as in every age, the game is never truly won. It is only handed to the next player who believes they have finally learned all of its rules.